Dan. Who is Dan? I'm a CG lead stroke effects TD working at ETC, where I've been getting on for 4 years now. It'll be 4 years in June since I joined. And I've been working in VFX since 1997, which a couple of years back made me realize that I've actually now been doing VFX longer than I haven't been doing VFX, which is a scary thought. I'm going to talk a little bit about ETC. So we're this lot here. In fact, definitely more people than we are there now. And we're based in the Truman Brewery building in Brick Lane in East London. This is our studio. We moved into this space just over a year ago now. And here are fancy colour suites with all the knobs and dials that we're not allowed to touch. And more recently, quite excitingly, as of a few weeks ago, we're also now in New York, baby. So this is our new office, which I hope you'll agree is looking fantastic. And we already have projects underway, and yeah, can't wait to get cracking over stateside. So ETC, as you know, we're a VFX studio, but we're kind of really made of three entities. So there's ETC, the VFX studio, we have Electric Colour for grading and finishing, and Electric Studios, which is the 2D animation design and direction arm of the company. And our head of creative, Jeff, is sat right over there, and we'll be actually up in the lobby if anyone wants to come and grab him afterwards. Yeah, and they also, apart from doing all that stuff, produce great hats, which I have here. And the first two people to ask a question at the end will get Electric Studios hats. So before we begin, I'm going to just show you the ETC VFX showreel. So the main focus of this talk today is going to be about last year's year just gone, Christmas's campaign for Sainsbury's Christmas campaign, which some of you may have not seen. Big brand in the UK. So it was a super fun project. lots of interesting technical challenges to solve to execute the job. And so first I'll give a broad overview of the project's concept and inception, and then later on go in a little bit more of a semi-technical deep dive into the nitty-gritty of that stuff. Before that, I'll show you another video. Here's the film.
Prawn coattails, beef welly boot, wigs in blankets. Oh, hey Sainsbury's, how can we make this Christmas a bit more Phizz-whizzing?
BFG.
Oh, I got snowflakes on my snorkeler.
I hear you need our help.
As a matter of fact, I does.
We need salmon from Maisie.
Buy gumdrops, just look at them.
And fresh sprouts too.
Oh, gloriumptious.
And cheeses from Grant.
Smells like snuzzcumbers. Go on, skedaddle. Nosier than a Parker, he was.
That's everything. What now?
We makes it dreamy. Cover them gogglers. Ah, gelumptious. Frog scuttle?
We need to find a home for all this first.
Want to go big this Christmas? Ask Sainsbury's.
Happy Christmas, BFG.
Happy Christmas, Sophie.
Sainsbury's. Good food for all of us.
Thanks. So obviously the main client was Sainsbury's, who are one of the largest supermarket chains in the UK. The agency was New Commercial Arts, and the project was directed by Sam Brown with production company Rogue. And for anyone that doesn't know Sam, he's an absolutely fantastic director who we worked on many projects. And his work you will 100% definitely have seen, because he produces amazing stuff. And we love working with Sam. He's a brilliant communicator and collaborator, and this kind of left field concept of having the BFG be this stop motion character sort of transposed into the real world at giant scale came from Sam's mind and was in his treatment, and kind of what ultimately won him the job. So finally, overlooking all of this, or overseeing kind of all the creative decision making that involved the BFG and his world and the sort of the stuff lifted from the book, we had the Roald Dahl Story Company who had to kind of give their approval and blessing to kind of any decisions on those sort of things that were around the kind of IP, I suppose. And it sounds kind of scary having this person kind of always dipping in, but they were actually really accommodating and great. So here, these are some close to final, I don't think they're the final storyboards, but you can see they're pretty much exactly what you see in the film. Pretty much frame for frame, apart from maybe the very end. So I'm going to talk a little bit about locations, which you might not have been expecting for a talk like this, but I think it's quite interesting. Like, nothing is left to chance in production. Obviously, it's an expensive business, so considerations of like the location of the sun, sizes of physical spaces, access for equipment, safety, all that stuff needs to be considered, and to determine, before they go and shoot there, that the BFG at the scale we want him would actually fit in the space that they're shooting in. And one thing people tend to forget with these Christmas campaigns is that they're invariably shot at the back end of summer or kind of early autumn, where everything's green and lush. So, they've got to take that sort of stuff into consideration as well. And part of the reason I put this in was to show you this last frame here, where the apartment, where he reaches in and puts the bundle on the table. You assume it is on the second floor of an apartment block, but obviously practically and for safety reason, it makes way more sense to just shoot it on a ground floor garden flat and then just replace the background. So that's kind of the flat that you suppose is in an apartment block. And is that playing? So the same can be said for the art department. Everything is planned in meticulous detail, and it's really helpful for us as well. That kind of might flag up before the shoot any unexpected challenges that might be brought about by sort of decisions and things built by the art department. And it's kind of bi-directional relationship. We might assist them with planning out the scale and shape of like the cave, for example. I think we did, have some input on that. And it can help solve any questions of scale and stuff that might become a problem. Especially, it was quite Inception-like, the scale conundrum on this job. And finally, casting. I've put this in, but just because it's a little-known fact that Sainsbury's, for their Christmas campaigns, rather than casting trained talent, they'll audition and choose one of their shop workers to play the main character. So the girl who played Sophie is actually a Sainsbury's shop worker. So the next step after that would be previs, obviously, and you can see here how we can work with Sam to kind of help him work out in advance some of the lensing. Obviously we know the camera they're going to shoot on, so we know the film back. We can help with the kind of choices of lensing and composition, and again making sure that these measurements and sets are going to kind of meet the needs of the sort of creative. And solve problems before they become problems. That's, I guess, the main purpose. And it helps Sam, but it also is beneficial to us as well. Again, as you can see, it's pretty close to what ended up being shot. I'll skip on the rest of that. So once, obviously, all those pieces are in place, the shoot gets underway. Here you can see the cleaver chop was actually performed by somebody, and we cleaned out what we needed to put the BFG on top and replace that out. There was a stand-in in each of the shots, which really helped for getting an idea for lighting reference. Also, dog trainers pulling terrifying expressions, makeshift BFG heads on sticks, people gesturing at C-stands, just standard production stuff. And here you can see the dream jars on the shelves. Initially, we thought we assumed we were going to have to be, once we'd solved this kind of dream trail setup, we'd have to instance and place hundreds of swirling live kind of animations in there. But because it became apparent that all this stuff was going to be so defocused all of the time, they solved it practically, thankfully, on set with LEDs. And then again, sets and props, go based on all this stuff, the designs and research the art department has done, they kind of obviously went about building these things. So here's the BFG head saddle for that moment. And here's our creative director, Chappers, checking out the bag rig for Sophie. And obviously, as you'd expect, for all the setups and shots, we shot HDRIs. And there are some cases where it might not actually, because of all the production. There's a good example, kind of junk in there, not junk, but the stuff that's left out when we were taking the HDRIs. It might not be useful for lighting, but it can be invaluable for reference. After the shoot for something you might not have remembered to note down or whatever. For that itself, it can be quite helpful. And then CG sets and props. In addition to the HDRIs, some of the things needed to be scanned or captured for integration and interaction purposes. So the table is a perfect example of that. Was the main thing, really, for the dream trails to come out, to be able to integrate them and also plan the routes and timings and kind of have something that was quite pleasing. We needed a physical representation of the table. So we got a pretty spiffing scan out of Metashape from all those pictures that Simon took on the shoot, which you'll see untextured in a second. Look at that cabbage. I mean, come on. Yeah, so that was super valuable to have. I mean, it just enabled that shot to work, basically. And the same process was used for the cave itself. I've chopped out the table here because in this scene I think I was doing the table shot, so I had the other table scan. And again, same goes for any props that we knew we were going to have to make in CG as well. Tons of pictures were taken on the shoot for that purpose. And here you can see a handful of those. And there's the magical Phizz-whizzing jar. So the BFG, as well as being a brilliant director, Sam is also a fantastic illustrator. These are all Sam's sketches. Here is some of his character explorations that he drew early on, and I think they give really good context for the BFG's attitude and behaviour. I mean, we know the character from the book anyway, but Sam's interpretation, what he wanted in the film, it kind of gives you a really good idea of who he is as a character. And hopefully they took the pitchforks off everyone at the door, but yeah, we're going to talk about AI a bit. We do use AI. We use it for kind of early ideation, really just to start out with a kind of broad map where we can say, well, we're going this direction or that direction. It's not really about final pixels. There will invariably be a concept artist augmenting, tweaking, taking that and taking it further. So I think it's just it can be a useful tool to just really quickly find a route, because with commercials, we're working on very limited times and we don't have weeks and months like a feature film would to develop this stuff. And again, if we've settled on something, we can just push it through and just nudge it around, kind of just to see if there's anything that we hadn't thought of that might enhance it even further or improve it. But ultimately, this was kind of what Sam settled on and formed the basis of where we were when we started developing the CG. Before we did that, it was decided that Sam really wanted to have an actual physical, practical model made of the character, and he approached Andy Gent of Arch Model Studio, who is the best of the best. I mean, he probably know his work on all the Wes Anderson films, Isle of Dogs, Fantastic Mr. Fox, as well as Coraline, Corpse Bride, Frankenweenie, loads of TV commercials. I mean, he's the guy you go to. So he set about actually creating this model, and not only just building the model, but actually articulating it. So it was built to be animated. So it has an armature, all the clothing was wired and everything so that it could actually be animated. And this was great because for us, seeing how we were going to have to ultimately match this and seeing how the clothing would respond to being manipulated and touched was something that we really wanted to understand early on. And we could look at other films for reference, but we wanted to know about this character in particular. And obviously, while this was being made, we wanted to scoop up as many images of reference as we could to get cracking before the film was shot. We did that. But in due course, he did actually turn up unceremoniously in a suitcase, and we got to get cracking in earnest, really, but not before we had a little bit of fun around the studio. These are some of the more safe for work poses. And this shows the kind of evolution of the model and its groom and shading, and the important thing to get right was the kind of amount of blotchiness, scattering, and waxiness of the model, because it was really important, and the thing that Sam kept saying is, this needs to look like it's a 2 foot tall stop motion puppet, even though it's being transposed and placed in a world where it's 24 foot tall, I think was the actual measurement he was supposed to be in the real world. He still needed to look like he was this small stop motion puppet. And so here's a turntable of the final groom by our brilliant groom artist, Joe. And Joe also built a setup into the look when we came to do final shot execution, which would give the little jitter to the hair that also happens. It's not just the clothes, you know, when it's being manipulated, sometimes little bits of hair will be disturbed in the sort of stop motion process. And here we can see the final asset minus his cape. So now we had the model nailed down, the animators could get to work doing what they do best, which is recording cringy videos of themselves acting out key moments. So the guy rocking the sliders and socks there is Jared, one of our great animators. Just performing some of those key moments, and that's Fabrice, our animation director, doing the frog scottle shot. Sam also supplied loads of takes of him performing stuff. They were, some of the best ones were of Sam actually, but I've left them out of this talk mainly to ensure he keeps coming back with more work. And this is an early stress test of the rig that Fabrice did, just to see what was and wasn't possible, how it would hold up, and kind of laying out the broad strokes about how to sort of match this stop motion aesthetic, which was key to the film and is not always as simple as just animating on twos, you know, which you'd think, and I'll go into that a little bit later. So Andy Gent then had one of his associates spend a day or two creating some stop motion tests that we could use for reference. Again, not just for the movement, but also to see how frequently the glitches and pops and the effect of the manipulation on the clothes would sort of be visible. So this is a side-by-side comparison of our CG character with the hand-animated stop-motion character. There's no CFX on here, that's why there's some intersections and whatnot and no jittering. And you can see that the arms were eventually shortened following kind of a few rounds of feedback and conversations between Sam and the Roald Dahl people and our animators. It was felt that they were a little bit over length in the physical model. And here we got a run cycle of kind of the final result with all the things applied. Okay, so remembering that this is a side effects talk, I'm going to get more into the effects side of this. So the effects tasks, obviously not an obviously effectsy project, but there were actually a substantial number of challenges that we had to work through with a fairly small team and not a huge amount of time. So these included, obviously, as we just spoke about, the stop motion CFX, including the cape, the dream trails coming out the trumpet, going over the food, snow, the Christmas film, obviously lots of snow, cold breath on the moments that we see Sophie outside, the wet sand running along the beach, the frobscottle, which for anyone not familiar with the books is the green drink he likes where the bubbles travel downwards and the foam forms at the bottom. It's kind of like an inverted beer setup. The space hopper that gets squished in the garden, and then the cloth bundle, the Phizz-whizzing, which is kind of a derivative of the dream trails, and the end board, the trails right at the very end. So I'll start with the CFX. So, as I mentioned, whenever we saw the BFG, we would need to see TFX. And I think this was like the very first test I did, and I didn't use the wrinkle deformer SOP. Houdini 20.5 was very new. I'll go into that shortly, but so what I was using here was a third-party SOP called House of Secrets Relax. I don't know if anyone's used it. It was fantastic. It's kind of been made redundant now with the wrinkle SOP. And so we used that in last year's John Lewis campaign with the Venus flytrap. It does the same sort of thing, does the wrinkles, uses OpenCL, it's super fast, but doesn't support collisions. And at this point, so yeah, here's another tool, test using the same tool. Literally just, that was in, that's what came out. Minimal interaction on my part. And so basically, because of our pipeline, 20.5 was recently released. It wasn't supported on our pipe yet, so a lot of the functionality or caching, farm and stuff wasn't really set up yet for 20.5. So that's why I wanted to explore and exhaust kind of all possibilities of doing it in 20 before I made the decision to like try and encourage our pipeline team to be a little bit faster. They're fantastic. I shouldn't say that. They're amazing. But then what we found we could do is we could work around it. So we did the job in Houdini 20, but we had like a little pre-published hook in our pipeline where when the animator published his anim, it would run a headless Houdini process just before published that would run it through the Houdini 20.5 Wrinkles setup and then insert it into the kind of asset that got published. So we had it as a separate component. When it came to lighting, the lighters could, if there was a wrinkle component, they could just switch to that and render the wrinkle stuff. If it was missing for whatever reason, they could just render the animation and still get their lighting done. And it was great because we didn't have to have that role of the guy going, oh, there's a new anim published for shot 20. I better open up Houdini and run it through the setup and then publish it. It just was happening by, whenever the animator hit publish, that all happened behind the scenes and it ended up with the lighters. So that was really saved us, days of wrangling. And so, as I mentioned, by using 20.5's Wrinkle Stop, we could also use collisions with the set geometry as well. So here you can see that he's actually sitting on a bench in this shot. So the anim, his rear end is kind of right through the bench that he sat on, but that gets solved as well with the solver. And the way I did that was if there was a piece of geometry published in a shot with a certain asset name, then it would just load it in to the automated setup and use it. If it didn't exist, it'd just carry on as usual. So the elements, this is the kind of setup, the kind of headless processing setup, and I separated out the parts. They kind of had a priority to the shirt would collide with the body and the set geo, same for the trousers, and then the waistcoat would collide with the solved shirts, the solved trousers, and the set geo, and we could kind of layer up. And it wasn't without issue. Like right at the end, there were a few moments where it required a little bodge, just on sort of delivery week. But for the bulk of the job, it just worked. So it was fantastic. And they made an HDA called Instacloth, which was basically just the wrinkle sop wrapped, but had with some other kind of housekeeping and features for post-processing and catching some edge cases and what have you. So here's another run cycle which shows the final result. And like I say, what I'm showing here is that the animation is not just on 2s. The animators found that you got a more aesthetically pleasing result if, say, the planted feet were kept on 1s, or different limbs were on 2s, but on odd frames or even frames. It wasn't always just like do the anim, cut out every other frame, and there you go, you're off. So there was some refinement to it, and when you see it on the run, you don't necessarily notice it, but I think it really elevated the work they've done, and it was great work by them to kind of to work that out. And also with the CFX, because of this, we needed to solve which pieces needed to have the pops and changes and when, and so that was done inside that Instacloth HDA. It would also process the sequence and go, okay, at this frame I should update. If the character's been still for like 30 seconds, his trousers wouldn't move at all, but that kind of looks a bit crap. So you have like a maximum amount of time that something can be completely static before something just random pops on it. So those are other considerations we had to bring in for the CFX. And the cape was also kind of had a basic rig, so the animators could block out the cape's movement. And actually, probably in half the shots, I think we just stuck with the animators' cape animation because it was looking great. But we did explore, we had the capability of running it through a sort of more vanilla vellum sort of CFX thing, but obviously then you had to solve the same problems of the characters moving on twos, but you need to solve it smooth and then put it back on twos, but then it has to be pinned to the neck, and it wasn't trivial, so it was kind of used sparingly, and there's only a few cases where we actually used sim on the cape. And again, here's another example of all the things put together. So the other big challenge was the dream trails. And in order to get the film done in the time we had, we knew that we'd need directable paths, directable timings, directable colors, and ability to preview all of that stuff quickly and iterate it quickly. So the tool I'd made was basically you gave it a single curve. I didn't use viewer states or anything fancy. And then that would get duplicated and spread to create the kind of shape, and twisted and spread and what have you. And then I'd duplicate those curves again and then carve, trim them and make them do the little swizzles, as we called them, the swizzlers. But if any of those intersected with the table, so if the main curve intersected with the table or any of its child curves, I would kind of I would push them outside of the surface, but then if the swizzlers did, I'd just throw them away. And then once we had these kind of shapes fleshed out, we could see them in the viewport, see the color, see exactly where they were going to go. We'd sort of run these pulses along them, and then you had the ability to tweak the timings and length, size, the shape of those. And they were just basically blobs of points which held all the necessary mission attributes to pass on to Pyro. And as you may or may not know, Pyro, the secret is usually in the sourcing. If you get your sourcing right, your Pyro kind of looks much better. So that was the important thing to kind of get right on that one. So with many curves, wasn't particularly scrubbable, but fast enough to quickly turn out flipbooks. And this is kind of like an example of where I've gone, okay, here are these two trails. What do you think of that, Sam? And one of the references that they asked that they wanted at the beginning, one of the things they suggested was that they should look like sort of dolphins swimming, how they kind of going around each other and having that kind of energy. And another component of the trails were the kind of sparkles, and the brief for those was just don't make them look like Tinkerbell magic fairy dust trails. But we did kind of put in a little bit of drift and fall on them to separate them a bit from the smoke, so they didn't get just lost following exactly the same motion. And the sparkles were just essentially just thousands of tiny little confetti discs, basically, that just pinged the light. And so once we had that made our lives much, much easier for the other stuff. So we had to do these food shots, and obviously the clients were super picky about, they were, picky's the wrong term, they were quite deliberate about where they wanted them to be and the timings they should have, and it had to work with the plate because someone was actually sprinkling on like little bits of stuff in the plate. So the fact that we had this kind of tool set up and we could repurpose it meant we could just smash through these pretty quickly and do lots of versions and iterations. And when a shot that's framed like this with this many trails was actually really, really fast to sim, and so we could turn the whole thing around like many times in a day if we needed to. So that was great. And same goes for the end logo. And this was something that we thought throughout, like, oh god, that's going to be a big task. But actually, we pushed that right to the end. And when we had the setup ready, we could turn it around. I think we didn't even start working on this till like 3 days from delivery, or something. So yeah, that was a huge enabler again here. And in terms of integrating them, it was decided on the shoot that actually just wafting some coloured lights roughly in that direction kind of would add a base of interaction that would kind of get us 50% of the way there for free, and then we would also render some actual AOVs, so we could get the shadows and highlights, and this is just the beauty. We had like groups and other AOVs to kind of help with the different materials and stuff. But yeah, we could combine the two and come up with a very pleasing result. So next line was snow. As I mentioned, lots of snow. We knew there would be snow in most outdoor environments. The sharp-eyed among you may have noticed that there was no snow at the Brussels sprouts farm, and that is because Brussels sprouts and snow do not jive. It's like kryptonite for Brussels sprouts, apparently. Who knew? Like they just were adamant that there shouldn't be snow at the farm because it would ruin a Brussels sprouts crop. So yeah, every outdoor shot, bar those, there was snow. And when you're doing large-scale environmental snow, you don't want to be pre-rolling the whole thing for like minutes into place, obviously. And if you just fill a volume and let it go, it doesn't always, well, it can be quite slow and it doesn't always give you that realistic thing. So what we would do is fill the volume, trim out all the things that were intersecting, a bit of ray casting, if it's under an archway, maybe like thin them out there, set their velocities, and just have that on the first frame, and then every other frame, just have the boundary of that, where the camera's frustum is through the shot, just sort of feed more in to have a very expanded frustum, so you can just feed in more as you need it, and it means you only have to pre-roll like a second or something, just so that you can get some of them contacting and melting, and the forces kind of having taken effect to look nice when you cut in on the first frame. And then for the look of the snow, what I found over the years is that if you get a set of snowflake variants that are just little VDBs and you instance them, you get a more pleasing snow than like cards or whatever. You somehow feel the kind of that volumetric property of the VDBs. And I'll just quickly skim over some of the other effects before we move on to some other stuff. So here you can see the beach run interaction, and that was brilliantly executed by an effects artist called Tom DiStasio, who was freelance on this job. The bundle placement was another challenging one because it's been held and swung in by this sort of stop frame hand, but once it released, it had to fall in real time for the continuity of the cut, and there was a lot of fiddling to get that one done. As simple as it looks, it was actually a bit of a pig. And the space opera ended up just being a fairly vanilla vellum setup, but with the gag being dependent on the face on the ball going brrr. So it took a few iterations, but actually it was fairly straightforward and quite successful, I think. And as I mentioned before, the Frobscottle, the funny upside down beer kind of effect for that. And this one had a lot of back and forth with Roald Dahl. They were very particular about how it should look before they would sign it off. So with all that said, I'm going to show the BTS, and then we can talk about some other things. So in the final part of my talk, I'm going to just speed run through a number of other projects that I've been involved in the last 12 months, sort of give you an overview of the sort of stuff that I've been working on. So I've made this short sizzle reel, for want of a better term. There was a ton of muscle work on that bear that you don't see at all. That was my involvement on that one. So while making the BTS for Sainsbury's that you just saw, so I'm going to run through some of the HDAs that I've made for these various jobs. I made a setup, I finished up a setup that I'd started a while back for just blending cameras easily, and also visualizing the paths, just to help with setting timings, and it's really helpful to see the frame spacing to know if there's any kinks and kind of preview that sort of stuff. And the visualizer that you see there for the different cameras is actually just a separate HDA that I've sort of embedded into that. So you can apply that to any camera and just view the trail and kind of understand how the timing of its motion. And on Coca-Cola Heroes, we created a whole ton of tools. Here's one I made for sort of trying to create nice curved motion smearing. Not as fast as other solutions you may have seen, but it's quite robust. Like I took this approach of prioritizing robustness over speed. But it was fast enough. And here's a flipbook of that, combined with a really early version of the line work tool that I also made for the Coca-Cola Heroes project. It's, at this point, super jittery, still kind of pleasing in a weird way. And my goal for the line work tool was not to concern myself, like I said, with speed. Computers can do the work, they can do the computation. I wanted to focus on it being robust and basically outputting clean curves that didn't just look right through camera, but could also hold up to 3D scrutiny, and they didn't depend on having geometry present to hold them out. You could literally create these lines and have them be their own thing without having to have a piece of geometry in there hiding the strokes or whatever. I wanted them to work. So again, that was sort of the motivation. So, like I say, fast isn't always the best thing, and if you do have a render farm and you can just spread this out, I'd rather just let the machines do the work and I deal with the kind of creative stuff like that. So also having a stable ID was also kind of super important, so that you didn't want to apply a noise and just have it like doing this. I don't know if anyone's familiar with 1980s British TV, kids TV, but you get this kind of rhubarb and custard effect with the outlines, and they just kind of boil. So having a stable ID that could kind of, so I have this ID solver, which you can see there, which takes care of that, which I'll show in the next video actually. So here's Juggernaut, and you can see the ID. You can see the IDs there. That's them being visualized, just jittering and changing on every frame. And then as soon as you enable the ID solver, which has already been processed there, it's not like real time. It not 100%, but massively reduces all that kind of flickering, and you get a stable ID for each curve, which means you can then, apply these effects. And by having this stable ID and having it solved, you can then get an age as well. So you can have the age of that line, and you can use that to draw it on or off, and all these other things open up to you, all the other possibilities. And this just basically works by taking the screen space. So there was a lot of flipping between screen space, world space, screen space, world space, and it would kind of advect the curves using their screen space velocities back to where they were, advecting them backwards and then comparing them with the previous frame. And if there was a sufficient amount of coverage with the previous frame, just pass the ID forward and kind of repeat. And it worked pretty well. But the other thing I wanted is for it to work on really large sort of geometry sets, and with these sort of buildings that you get from various places. Like it might come from TurboSquid, it might be modeled by us, it could be some, I don't know, it could come from anywhere. There's always a lot of jank in these things, and again, I wanted to make sure that it could cope with that. So there was, it did get quite slow to process these sort of bigger, wider city shots. But again, let the machines do the heavy lifting and don't stress, I think is the kind of way to look at it. And again, it was really important to me that a building in the foreground shouldn't have a line in 3D space connecting it with like a lamppost that's like 3 blocks down the road. So it was kind of, that was something that here, as you can see, everything kind of holds up when you tumble around. It exists only where it should do in 3D space. So moving on from that onto Audible, you might have noticed these kind of robot crowd agents walking around. And if you look really carefully, you'll see little puffs of dust coming off their feet, kind of all getting blown across the landscape. And so part of doing that, and also for setting up the agents, I have this agent clip prep tool that I've made that I've sort of been improving over the last couple of years, which is helpful for taking in animation from kind of any source, getting it oriented, trimming it, making it loopable, getting the foot plant channels right and everything, and then just having you be able to chain them together and output your agent at the end and know that all the clips are kind of going to do what you want and have all the things that they need. And by doing that as well, I also could easily extract out the footprints and derive an age for those, so I could tell how long it had been since the foot landed, and use that to drive instance kind of pre-simulated foot kind of dust emissions on all the soldiers. So you can really quickly level up quite a big scene by just sprinkling in some of that stuff. The last project that I just worked on was SAP. Here you can see geometry contact sheet HDA, which I've made, which I'm hopefully one day going to wrap up and throw out into the world. And you can see that the geometry coming in for these plants that we rigged could be very janky, and I didn't want to rely on UVs. So I made this sort of plant rigging HDA, which is quite, again, it's quite thorough and tolerant of crap geo. And so bring them in, rig it, get a vellum ready kind of rig, and the animation on these is all procedural, which meant once you'd predetermined that animation, you could just drive the growth with a single slider or single attribute, just called grow, and then pass that into vellum, and then get your nice kind of springy jazz coming out the other end. As you can see. And by having that attribute, the reason I set it up that way was I had thought that maybe we would pre-scatter the rigs and then be able to do, I did some tests where, I could offset the grow attribute per scattered plant and then pass them into vellum and have them all grow and collide and interact and simulate the whole lot kind of wholesale, but we kind of didn't do that in the end. We just ended up caching them in place and offsetting alembic caches because it was kind of good enough and it was definitely much easier. But here is a test where I kind of did do that. I don't think there's any collisions turned on here. Where there's a sort of bit of wind kicks in. But you can see, like, even though we're just simulating curves, not geometry for these leaves, even quite broad leaves, you kind of get away with it. It's enough, you're filling in huge areas of with these plants. You don't need to notice each kind of individual leaf being affected. And finally, here's the same thing again on a tree, which is much heavier. And obviously with the tree, you want to decide on the threshold at which you stop trying to make curves. You don't want to make every tiny little micro twig have its own curve. It would just get out of control. So once you've determined that sort of cutoff point, anything below that, as it were, sort of detail-wise, just becomes rigidly constrained or parented or enveloped to the closest curve it can find, hierarchy-wise. Yeah, and so that's what we did for SAP, and that is actually the end of the talk. So, questions for hats?
Questions for hats. Awesome work, Dan. Thanks for sharing. Oh, that was the first one. Well, first the question. Yeah. Let's see if it's worth the hat.
Thanks for the presentation. Amazing. I was wondering, apart from generative models applied to concept art to generate, do you use any other AI or machine learning powered tools in production from the perspective of a big studio, like, I don't know, text prompts to 3D models or style transfer or anything?
We don't use text to 3D model stuff. We have looked at it. We know it's out there and we've explored it. Style transfer, we used it on Coca-Cola Heroes, but we were doing it for Marvel with their IP, and we did, for the work we did on Black Widow, we also did have concept artists, some really amazing illustrators producing stuff, which we trained kind of Laura's on for that job. So, we're looking into it. I don't feel there's any huge. It's not viewed as like sinful, I think, in our company, is what I'd say. But it's not like we're just squirting AI everywhere. It's like, yeah.
You develop some internal tools with machine learning.
It's loosely, yeah. We haven't really got tools per se, but our pipeline is capable to run things through AI if it needed it. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Got your hat.
There are some nice ways of integrating ML into Houdini, as we've seen already, but we'll see that more and more over time. As long as the training data is clean and ethical and you know where it's been sourced, there's all kinds of interesting ways of using ML and AI inside of Houdini. Any other questions? Yes. Grab that hat. And the other one too. Who was that up here? Yeah.
Thank you so much for your cap, but my question is not about the cap, actually. And I have two questions. The first of all, I'd like to know what render engine do you use in your works? And if we talk about GPU renders, how do you solve such troubles with geometry maybe, or something like that? And the second one, I've been learning Houdini since March this year, and our tutors push us using Solaris in Houdini, and I've noticed that you didn't mention during your program about Solaris or on your screenshots and something like that. So just curious about that.
Okay, I'll start there. I don't think I did show any Solaris. I mean, we do, our approach with Solaris is it arrived, doesn't necessarily mean it's immediately the best thing to use. You know, we've been producing work for years the other way. Just because this new shiny thing has arrived doesn't mean we have to immediately switch to it. But there are obvious cases where it does provide an advantage, and if there is an obvious advantage, then it's obvious to explore and use. So we do run some jobs through the King Slam one with the bear, you know, the sort of having the fur procedural and all that stuff. That whole show was done in Solaris, but then we've done subsequent ones since. You know, the SAP one that I showed with all the plants, that was done, you know, non-Solaris back at kind of the old way. So we mix it up. We don't have to do. And when we do render, like the bear was done in Karma, but other jobs that we do in Solaris, we do use Arnold as well. Both non-Solaris, primarily Arnold, you know, when we don't use Solaris, but if we do, we can use Arnold, but mostly, well, it's a split actually, I would say.
So it depends, right?
Yeah, and GPU rendering currently we just don't. Not in the VFX sort of team. Like the motion guys, you know, the studios guys may use it more, but we currently don't. We do have support for it. We used to use Redshift briefly for a certain project that was ongoing, so it's supported in some of our tools, although they've kind of been not maintained as well, some of the Redshift stuff. But yeah, at the moment we don't. And XPU is something I guess we need to explore more. Maybe good for look debbing with, maybe it is being used, I don't know. I'm a little bit out of touch, if I'm being 100% honest, with the kind of lighting guys, but that's my understanding.
Okay, thank you. This was amazing. Thank you.
If you're interested in Karma XPU, which is our CPU and GPU renderer, there's been some really nice presentations within the last week even that aren't published online but will be really soon. So one of those is Rise Effects from Germany, talking about The Last of Us and how they used Karma XPU, which is our newest renderer on Last of Us. Like, really great presentation, so if you want to look at that. Any other questions? Yeah. There's no more hats, though. I'm kidding.
First of all, thank you. It was great to see you talk here. And I have a two-part questions too. First of all, in the Coca-Cola ad, how did you manage to blend all those different styles together and still make it feel like one video that all works together? And in the Daredevil shot, how did you achieve the painterly look? It's like shading or a mix in shading and geometry?
Yeah, okay. So I developed the Daredevil kind of tools and look, with 2D obviously, but it's on the 3D side. And it was kind of 98% SOPs, solved in SOPs. So the shading was kind of very, not as important as the way it was treated in 3D, only because that's what I'm familiar with and I can't write shaders or anything. It's like, I know how this works and I can see it, not immediately, but I can see it and work with it and do the things that I know how to do with it if it's geometry. So yeah, I took an approach of, we would light and render Daredevil and then reproject him back onto the geo, carve him up, take him into screen space, do some stuff, put him back into 3D space, do some other stuff, put some strokes on it. Yeah, there was this kind of whole sort of process. There were still things with it that I feel are a little bit too poppy and we could have maybe done better, but on the whole, yeah, it was an exercise in SOPs, really. And with a bit of then some things going on with the UVs, updating the UV islands for each piece, again using a similar solution for the line ID solver to solve the pieces to determine when they should like have their UVs like shuffled. To kind of, they had this sort of papery texture, and there was some other edge bleed kind of UVs and attributes and AIVs that we passed on to comp that could just sort of pull them out.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, Dan. Well, thanks very much for sharing that. Awesome presentation.